We have a very special conversation and guest with us here in studio for Live Impact News. I want to welcome in Janet Roach, our beloved anchor here at 13 News Now, who joins us after she has put together a 30-minute, a half-hour special digging into the Trump administration and others' aggressive tactics to dismantle diversity, equity, inclusion, and what that means for our communities. And so, Janet, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a project you have really worked really hard on. Tell people about the project in and of itself and what you were hoping to accomplish.
Well, first of all, Eugene Daniel, you worked with me on the project. He's not giving himself credit, but yeah, he was a partner with me on this. It's DEI a discussion, and that's simply what it is, and getting people to talk about how they see diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also how they view the dismantling of that. We know that it was about this time last year when the Trump administration came in, they very aggressively decided that we are going to get rid of DEI. There was an executive order that was signed on January 20th. To do away with DEI federal programs. Some of these programs were programs that were put into place by the Biden administration with an executive order that he had done, when he was in office. And so as we watched, I think every week, on every other day, there was some sort of news story that came out about something that was happening in the area of DEI and getting rid of DEI. And so, Eugene, you and I had some conversations about it. We were getting feedback from people that we knew in the community. And so we decided, why don't we put together a panel of people who are watching this and are feeling like this is a detriment to historical progress, and get their feelings and hear their arguments as to why they think that DEI is actually a good thing. We also talk to many people who are on the other side of the equation who feel like it's time for DEI to die. So we talked to Governor Youngkin, Jason Miyares. I talked to a member of the Heritage Foundation. A lot of that Heritage Foundation has been in the news a lot. I know a lot of people say they're the people who are responsible for Project 2025. So I talked to a senior fellow with the Heritage Foundation. They've been one of the leading voices against DEI. So we put this all together, put all these voices together, and including the panel. And so, 30 minutes later, there it is.
And you mentioned my efforts in this, and it was definitely such an honor, Janet, to work with you on this and to kind of navigate the starting of it with you. But the work that you put in, I really hope people watch this documentary, because there is so much into it, just even in 30 minutes. And I know we have a few clips that we want to show people.
Yeah.
And so let's start off with the first one here that kind of intros how this discussion and sets the tone for the special.
Okay. We brought together this group of people to deliberate over a topic we hear so much about.
It is a conversation.
DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Words many say project strength, now being strangled by a narrative of division.
A lot of times individuals forget about accessibility.
When we talk about socioeconomic factors,
I don't want to dilute race,
including LGBTQ, veterans, youth.
These are experts who understand the meaning of DEI and say its purpose is being twisted, its promise mangled. What is diversity, equity, and inclusion?
It's a set of concepts and principles meant to inform policy, governmental practices and institutions and social institutions to correct racism, to correct bias, to correct discrimination, and to then usher in what we would consider and understand as people in this country to be fair.
Religion and culture and your sexual orientation and all of it is not something you see when you walk out the door. And so it is an attempt to embrace the intersectionality of it so people feel included but also feel like they belong.
So that is the introduction there, Janet. We were talking about a panel that, we were able to assemble, and the dialogue there that day alone. I remember sitting there with you. We talked for at least 2 hours?
Yeah, it was supposed to be about an hour.
Yeah.
And it stretched, and we ended up just having to cut it off. So there was no real packaged ending because people had so much to say about it. It was about 9 people on the panel. You heard there from Dr. Kalita Fairfax. She's with NSU, social justice policy professor, and then the other person speaking there was Stacy Walls. She is the CEO of the LGBT Life Center in Norfolk. So we got people from all different backgrounds, and it was a very, lively discussion. And their arguments, I really hope people will listen, and because people, I think there's been so much misinformation about DEI, and I think one of the biggest things that people get wrong, that some people would argue is wrong, that when you have these DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and programs, that when you are helping certain groups of people, you're hurting other groups of people. And I know that was not supposed to be the intention of DEI, but people see it that way. And so it's interesting to listen to some of their arguments as to why they see DEI is important and how they see it correcting some of the systemic barriers. So one of the things that I do in the discussion is I talk about an issue that stems from decades ago, housing. And everybody can relate to housing and some of the discriminatory practices that were going on in the area of fair housing, and how you can take those practices from back in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s and see how they still resonate today. And why there might be policies in place today that sort of address some of those systemic barriers. And a lot of the funding and those policies are part of what's being put on the DEI cutting board.
Janet, one of the things that, speaking to that, I remember taking away from it as well in that discussion. You mentioned how the impact of one group, how it can impact other groups. It was just a general idea that so many people have this misconception too, that DEI only focuses on one group. But there are so many groups that are impacted by those DEI policies that are benefited throughout our country and our communities. Now, you also were talking about housing, and I know another conversation that we got into that day was this idea of merit. How did that show itself in this particular the dialogue that happened not only in that panel discussion but throughout the makings of this documentary?
A very big word in this whole debate about DEI, merit, because the feeling of people who are against DEI, they think that it undermines merit and that you're choosing people for certain positions or college admissions or what have you based on things like gender and race, and you're not choosing them based on them being qualified. And that's something that the panel did push back on. Because some people would say that what DEI is, it's not about finding people who are unqualified and giving them things that they don't deserve. It's about expanding that talent pool and creating equitable access to opportunities. not taking away from another group and not saying, I'm going to give this to you because you're African American, because you don't really deserve it. I'm just going to give it to you because of your race. It's because historically, you've had so many instances where certain groups were not even brought to the table in the first place. And a lot of that has been corrected over time, but not completely. So, yeah, we do have another clip where we talk a little bit about merit. When we hear anti-DEI voices, one word that always surfaces to the top:
merit.
You should be hired based on merit.
Merit, the quality of being particularly worthy, deserving.
We believe that whether you are a doctor, an accountant, a lawyer, or an air traffic controller, you should be hired and promoted based on skill and competence, not race or gender. Very important.
Merit is based on assumptions. As a person with a disability, if I go into a job interview and say I have a significant physical disability, my resume has gotten me into the interview. You have seen in my resume something worth of merit to call me to an interview. But the minute you see a person with a disability who's coming in for a job interview, who may have a significant disability, merit goes out the window, even though my education, my resume says it. What is there is their assumptions. You're biased. There's a lack of knowledge. The disability community, we didn't get our civil rights until 1990 with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you say ADA today, a good percentage of the population think you're talking about the American Dental Association.
She's the CEO, the director of the Independence Center, END with an E. And Eugene, I know you spent some time there and talked to some of the folks there and got to see some of what they do. And they help a lot of people, with disabilities. And there's a struggle. They worry about some of these policies ending because they have to fight extra hard for a seat at the table.
And one thing that I really appreciated about Nicole and Independence as well is they really have a great grasp on communicating what the issues are, because as she would say, you can't just look at someone and know all the time that they might have a disability, you know? And so you have to be able to advocate. And sometimes in the case that we were able to go and interview one woman who is not only has been a part of in service receiving services through Independence, but now supports and works through it. Communication is a big thing, right? And so even in doing our interview for her, she literally had some people who were translating using sign language and then speaking back. It was just this really awesome moment of how collaborative efforts with everybody who was there at Independence to communicate. And it's so, you don't, that was my biggest takeaway from just that interview, is that there are so many ways in which these policies and DEI have supported people across the board that I know I wasn't talking about as much prior to even getting into it, and then you're within your documentary. And so for them, they're desperately hoping that these policies don't end because it supports them in everyday life.
Yeah, everyday life. So that was, and you'll see some of what you were talking about with the person, and they're having to do the deaf person actually, speaking and talking about how some of the things that she's able to do for people who go to the Independence Center. So I thought that was a good addition and a way to show, the different, you heard from Stacey Walls with the LGBT Life Center. You're hearing from Nicole Davis. We also have, Patricia Bracknell. She's the president of the Chamber for Hispanic Progress. Ramin Fatahi, who is the Commonwealth's attorney for Norfolk, is also on the panel. Michelle Ellis Young, she's the CEO of the YWCA of Southampton Road. So she works on a lot of women's rights issues. So this is a really wide net. This is really affecting a lot of people, and so much of this stemmed from that 2023 Supreme Court decision, Students for Fair Admissions against UNC and Harvard. And that's where the Supreme Court banned race-based admissions. And I think that case, people have looked at that case and they're stretching it into so many different organizations, both in the public and the private sector, and getting rid of DEI programs.
Now, Janet, when you were going through this process, you're going through your interviews. I was there with you for the panel discussion when you talked to more people after that, including those who are on the other side of this. Was there anything that stood out to you from those discussions? Anything that surprised you or that you thought were of note to mention here as we tease up the special?
Nothing that really surprised me, but I do know that they all say very similar things. And I talked about merit, but the other two words that come up a lot is reverse discrimination, illegal discrimination and reverse discrimination. And the governor mentions that. We cannot have illegal discrimination. The attorney general mentions that. And they both talk about a case in Northern Virginia, Thomas Jefferson High School. That's a very elite high school. You may have heard of, and it has a tough admissions policy to get into this high school. Supposedly one of the best high schools in the country, if not the best. And so Miaris actually launched an investigation into their admissions policy because he says they were using a race-based admissions policy that was discriminating against Asian Americans. And so that went to court, and the court decided that the policy should stand, but now the Department of Justice is investigating the policy. And so that's something that, and I did ask, one of our, she wasn't on the panel, but Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, history whiz, African-American history whiz, about, this argument of illegal discrimination. What do you say when people say we can't have reverse discrimination? And she has an interesting answer, so you have to watch in order to.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, and she is always so great in her responses, so calculated as well, if you've never heard from her as well. Now we have another clip too. And
yes.
Tell us about this this next clip that we're going to be seeing. What's the background on it?
All right, this is David Ireland. He is a Regent University graduate, and he's not actually in the special. So this is kind of like one of the extras that we're putting out there. But he is the founder and CEO of the Belong Group, Building Bridges Across Differences. And he's a diversity and organizational leadership consultant for many groups, including the NBA. And he says that, diversity, equity, inclusion is a good thing, but we're going about it all wrong. And he lists 4 things that we need to pay attention to when we're trying to enact DEI policies. So let's listen to what he has to say.
There are 4 components to cultural intelligence, one of which is knowledge. You have to understand what is it that we're dealing with, the values, the practices. Then you have strategy. That includes awareness, planning. The third is behavior, verbal, nonverbal actions. But where people go awry is in the 4th ingredient. The 4th ingredient is motivation. If someone, be they white, black, Latino, Asian, Native American, if they feel that there's no, what's the drive, what's the passion, what's the inclination, what's the motivation for me to be able to be diverse, then they're going to be opposed to it. And I think that much of the DEI structure has lacked that 4th ingredient, that they did not create motivation. Motivation has to be built around relationship and trust. And again, I'm using the term psychological safety. It has to become welcoming. It can't be just lecturing. It can't be a monologue. It can't be where one side is then given the voice and the other sides are not. And so when we think about inclusion must create the sense of belonging and welcoming. It's almost like if I invited you over to my home for dinner, I have to then think about, what do you like? And is the environment welcoming? Do you feel at peace? Do you feel at ease? Or do you feel that I just invite you over just to say something to you that I really just want to just, just pounce on you, so to speak, with rhetoric? And that's not a good thing. The benefits of inclusion when it comes to the marketplace is there's an uptick in profitability. There's a heightening of innovation. And so all
Right.
around, there's a lot of benefits to having this sense of a cross-racial, cross-cultural experience in the workplace. In fact, I've created a framework which I call cultural portfolio management. And I did that, and I wrote an article that Forbes magazine picked up. And my perspective is that let's put DEI to the side then, since everybody's fighting it and demonizing it.
Right.
Let's look at it as we would look at our money. Every one of us wants to manage our portfolio, our financial portfolio. Well, we all have a cultural portfolio to manage. And if we don't manage it well, we're going to lose profit. We're going to lose good people. We're not going to attract a diverse clientele to heighten innovation. We're not going to compete on the global stage if we don't understand that. And so my framing of that, of another framework to deal with cultural intelligence and cultural management of cultural portfolio management is saying that you need to investigate your cultural portfolio and keep your eye on it, just like you keep your eye on your financial portfolio.
Absolutely. But in the way that it is being rolled back, and I read some things about your group and how you are working on connecting, diverse voices to businesses and that type of thing. In the way that you see the Trump administration rolling it back and cutting back on programs and I guess to some people would say threatening universities that if you don't do this, we're going to pull funding. Um, does that put us in a worse space? Do you see that as something as pushing us back, taking us, losing progress collectively as a country?
I do, in many areas. I think that what would have been a better call from the Trump administration would have been reframing it so that it's more equitable, reframing DEI so that we have open conversation so that we can be able to improve. It's going to affect us nationally because innovation heightens based on diversity. And when diversity is not occurring, be it in the marketplace or in different spaces of society, then we, meaning our nation, is not going to be able to, to compete on the global market in certain areas that we could have been. So there's going to be a little loss. But I'm very hopeful in the fact that whether we like it or not, there's a diverse country, and we better learn how to get along.
He said, we better learn how to get along. He speaks there, Janet. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what did you think about that?
I thought that his position, and some of them, I get what he's saying. There's power in diversity and managing the cultural diversity of it all as well. And that's what I was taking it from him. And his comments about rephrasing DEI rather than just getting rid of it. What did you think about that?
Well, I think part of that is that he feels like DEI has been so attacked and weaponized that people hear that and they bristle, some people. But it's kind of interesting when he talked about the motivation piece. And I was listening to that and trying to get what exactly is he talking about. And I guess I believe his argument is that in talking about inclusion, you have to always talk about including everybody and including that even though you may say these underrepresented groups are the people that need the most help, here are some of the systemic barriers that have held them back in some ways, that even in discussing this, you must always talk about how every group is included. Never leaving any group out of the conversation, because when you do that, then you get this backlash. Then you get this, oh, you're helping these people at my expense.
Yeah, I feel like I would love to sit down in a room and have a conversation with him about that, because I know just automatically I'm thinking of the conversation that, okay, well, we're looking at now. but we're also talking about groups that have either been disenfranchised or haven't had their fair share at the table for quite a long
Historically.
time. Historically.
Right.
And so I would imagine the argument against that would start there when you're talking about that equal conversation.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I thought he made some good points, and
for
it's
sure.
a lot more. I'll have to try to pull up some more clips. Because I think I talked to him. That was maybe about 6 minutes or so. I think I talked to him almost 15 minutes, and I thought it was really interesting conversation. Really interesting conversation. But I think he makes some good points, and then there's some things where I'm still like, okay,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the beauty of this, right? I mean, we set out to have multiple voices to be able to speak to this, but definitely you want educated people who are in the space of DEI and can give a great perspective on what it is and what it means to have it dismantled within our communities. But for those who are going to be watching this, Jan, we got about 2 minutes left.
2 minutes.
I'll leave it to you to kind of share some lasting words here for the stream. What are you hoping people can maybe glean from watching this special?
Well, I hope they can learn more about what diversity, equity, inclusion is. And that, you know, for some people who bristle at just the thought of it or just hearing those words, that you get and that was my original when we talked about, you know, purpose with the panel. Just a group of people, really, really smart people that can make some arguments that give you something to really think about it. You know, that those moments where you say, well, gosh, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
You know, okay, yeah, that kind of introduces a point that has a lot of meaning. So I'm hoping people will do that. But I'm also hoping that, we haven't talked about this. I did do an interview with a member of the Heritage Foundation. And I just sent an email, and I thought, okay, they're not going to talk to it. But they were like, okay, yeah, when you want to do it. So I did talk to Mike Gonzalez, and he's very, very, very much against any kind of race-based anything. You know, he's like, we've got to get race out of everything. And, you know, go back to, I guess, some other fundamentals, as he calls it. So he's in there several times. It was a Zoom interview because obviously he's not based in this area. So that's something that, you know, should be interesting to listen to. I also talked to 2 former governors. Okay, we're out of time. Okay, yeah, former Governor Ralph Northam and Bob McDonnell. So that's an interesting short little conversation, too.
You got to check this out. You got to check it out. You got to check it out. DEI, a discussion already here on this platform, 13 News Now Plus, and on YouTube as well, and our website.